Welcome to Al Bernstein Unplugged on Boxing. In a 40-year Hall of Fame career, Al has chronicled some of the greatest moments in boxing history. On this podcast, you get to hear him expand on those memories and talk about the current news in the sport of boxing. You also hear Al interview some of the biggest names in the sport. Here's Al Bernstein Unplugged.
Hi, everybody, and welcome again. We are happy that you joined us for another episode of our show. And on this one, we get a chance to visit with a woman who is kind of a groundbreaker, Crystina Poncher, who is doing boxing broadcasting for ESPN and also for Top Rank. She is now only the second woman to do play-by-play on boxing. And she does the ESPN Plus shows and also the international shows that Top Rank does when they do the international distribution. Crystina is a very fine reporter. She's worked on the NFL Network and many other sport outlets, and now she is really committing a lot of her time, most of it, to the sport of boxing. So we have had a lovely chat with her that we're going to show you during the course of the show. We're also going to answer a number of your questions, and I have a very special flashback for you as well, dating back to a time when I met my idol. Right now, a gentleman who has always been my idol, and now I get to work with him, my friend Trip Mitchell. Trip, how are you?
Good, but maybe you want to aim a little higher? Just saying.
I grew up idolizing you.
Well, thank you very much. You know, I did some of my best work back when you were 8, 9, and 10 years old. But you are covering me.
You aged very well. You did.
I thank you. You know, my father-in-law keeps mentioning Don Dumphy, so you've got me off the hook. And his suggestions for the show is we focus on the golden era of fights back in the 50s. And I said, demographically, Saul, that might not work.
An occasional reference is good, and we will have a reference in my flashback tonight, but probably not the place we want to put all our efforts, for sure.
So you had a heck of a weekend. I watched the show, and it was fun to see you back working again. Mohegan Sun looked like they treated you guys very well.
Yeah, we kicked off our very busy Showtime schedule of boxing between now and the end of the year, and we started things off at what will be our new home away from home, the Mohegan Sun that you referenced, and they created a venue that was really kind of interesting. You know, it really worked very well, I think, for the boxing. Obviously, there were no fans there. They had to social distance us for the on cameras that we did, and also sitting ringside. We were separated from the ring with plexiglass and separated from each other as well, which is a key point because when you broadcast an event, your proximity to your other broadcasters, literally right next to them, is a big part of how you play off each other. And I will tell you, it took us a fight in that broadcast to really kind of figure out the interplay between us because of the distance that we had from each other, and we did, and I was pleased with the results, but it was a little bit of a challenge. So we did get past the COVID-19 challenges, and we had what turned out to be, I think, a really nice production.
Well, and the nice thing from this moving forward is that Showtime has done all the hard work now. When your bosses were planning this out, they probably didn't see the spike that's come in the last 4 weeks. So you guys are in great shape to go through the whole fall.
Yeah, getting through the first one, very important, and we did learn from the Top Rank ESPN shows were kind of the forerunner, and those shows were going into uncharted territory, and I'm sure that the people at Showtime learned from their experiences. And now that we've done one, we know the dynamics of it, and we can move forward with it. And we're looking forward to it. It was it's a good space to do the fights from, and I think we're going to have a good run of moving forward. But it is interesting. I didn't find anything different about doing it without the fans. I have to be honest. I didn't think I would, and I didn't. You're laser focused on the boxing match. The boxers are competing with the same intensity that they would if there were fans. So while of course, we all love the element of the fans being a part of it, it really didn't make it, that different an experience from the standpoint of announcing fights.
Well, what was interesting is both cornermen were mic'd up, but they realized that the other side could hear them, so they're whispering. And the other funny thing that happened in one of the undercard fights, you predicted it would end soon. The second those words came out of your mouth, the ref called it. And it was from your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah, it was funny. It was the fight with Ra'is Salim and his opponent, Marcus Bates. I saw him shaking his hand, Bates shaking his hand a little bit, like it looked like he was having problems. And then I said, look, he's got an issue with his arm. And I don't know and it turned out to be his wrist, but it was something with his right hand or arm or wrist. And very shortly after that, the referee did come in, and then it was stopped because of his issues with the arm. But, one of the things from when you're calling fights, if you're doing it the right way and if you're paying attention, you want to look at every element of what the fighters are doing. And sometimes you have to be careful about that. I've seen fighters appear to be uncomfortable, and if you sell it too hard, you won't look good, because then the next round, that right hand that you said you thought might be injured, boom, they use it to score a knockout or something. So you have to be really careful to word it in just the right way and not oversell it. But in this case, it did happen that way. So it was a good beginning to our schedule, and I was very pleased that we did that. You referenced earlier the great Don Dunphy, and as a matter of fact, he will be the topic of this week's flashback. Back in 1985, when we had done 5 years of the ESPN Top Rank Boxing Series on ESPN, we were celebrating our 5th anniversary, and we were trying to think of ways that we could make that show special. And somebody came up with the idea, and we were also moving to Friday nights. And somebody came up with the idea that since we were going to Friday nights, why don't we get the man that made the Friday night fights so popular on network television, the great Don Dunphy, to guest on the show. Well, when I heard that, my heart skipped a beat, because I grew up watching Don Dunphy. When I was a young man, I would sit, first when I was a young man, I would sit, my dad used to watch the fights, and I would be on the staircase out of eye shot of him, because I wasn't supposed to be up. And I would listen to the fights on TV as my dad watched them, and I heard Don Dunphy's voice describing the action. Unbeknownst to me, my mother and father knew all along that I was there. And finally, one night I heard my mother say to my father, "Okay, let him come down." And I got to come down and sit next to my dad and watch the fights. And Don Dunphy was the man doing the announcing. And that's where I got to see great fighters like Sugar Ray Robinson and all the other great boxers of the day. And so flash now forward to 1985, when I'm going to get to interview Don Dunphy for our 5th anniversary and moving to Friday night fights. And I have to tell you, I was pretty nervous, because I'd never met him. I didn't know him. I had no idea if he knew I existed, and what would it be like. And you know how you always wonder, people that you really admire, will they live up to your image of them? How will they be when you meet them? Well, Don Dunphy came in, put his hand out, and said, "Al, so nice to meet you." And it was so Don Dunphy-ish. It was so direct and open-hearted, and just the way I would have anticipated he would be. And we did an interview that went for about 6 or 7 minutes, which is very long for a network TV show that is where you're doing a live sporting event. It was a long interview, and it was just delightful. And when we got done with the interview, he gave me his phone number, and he said, I love what you're doing with your career. And he said, I'm very happy for you. And he said, feel free to call me anytime. Well, that was, I in my book, I joked about the fact that when he did that, the only other thing I can compare that to is the emotional feelings I had when I met my wife. So it was very, very special. And I did, in fact, call him. And over the years, Don Dunphy became a real mentor and a friend to me. And when Ring Magazine had their 50th anniversary, they did a special event in which they named certain people the greatest in different categories, and they named Don Dunphy the greatest boxing broadcaster of all time. And Don Dunphy requested that I be the one to present the award to him. So I was, over the moon about that. And over the years, we became really, really good friends. And of course, since Don's passed away, I still have a great connection to the Dunphy family, because Bob Dunphy, Bob's son, who has been one of the best directors in TV sports in the last 30-some years, has done a great amount of TV boxing and is the director for the Showtime shows. So,
fantastic.
So I've had the privilege of knowing the Dunphys for a long, long time, and the Dunphy family has done so much for the sport of boxing. So I look back at that time in 1985, and I look at it with great affection and nostalgia. And one of the joys of my life is knowing Don Dunphy. And I think I may have even, I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast, but another Don Dunphy story is when I was doing my shows at Caesar's Palace in the 80s, my music shows, and we would, before the big fights like Leonard and Hearns and Hagler, Leonard and Hagler, Hearns, and all those fights, Duran, Leonard, all those, I would perform at Caesar's Palace in the nights leading up to the fights. And Don Dunphy, in one of my early performances, came to one of the performances, and Don was a big devotee of Broadway. He, in his heyday in the 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, he knew many of the great creators of the Broadway musical scene. He was friends with Irving Berlin. He knew Cole Porter. He knew all the greats, Lerner and Loewe. He knew all the greats of Broadway theater. And he came to my show, and he said to me, he called me on the phone, he said, "Now you have to sing something that was written by Lerner and Loewe." He said, "I love Lerner and Loewe." He said, "So do me a favor, you got to sing me a song by Lerner and Loewe." I said, "Okay." So I sang something from My Fair Lady. I think it was On the Street Where You Live. And I look out in the audience that night, and there is Don Dunphy with a guest. And the guest was Frederick Loewe.
Wow.
Who had written all those great musicals with Alan J. Lerner. He brought him to the show, and here I was singing one of his songs to him. And Frederick Loewe ended up being a lovely, lovely man, and it was a thrill meeting him. So Don Dunphy provided me with all kinds of thrills, including that one. So that was a very, very special memory for me, to be sure.
Al, on a future show, is there any chance you'll do anything from the Book of Mormon or something?
That is a great show. Yes, that'll do. Maybe we'll see if we can do. We'll create a boxing version of it, and maybe write it.
Perfect.
So anyway, that was my experience with the great Don Dunphy, and he is still missed by me and many others. Talking about boxing broadcasting, if Don Dunphy were alive today, I am confident he would be happy with the work of this next person that we're going to interview. She is now doing play-by-play, as I mentioned earlier, on ESPN and on the Top Rank International shows. She's been a excellent broadcaster on the NFL Network and other places as well. And I got a chance to visit with Crystina Poncher. Here it is. Crystina, it is a joy to have you join this show. I've been looking forward so much to visiting with you and adding you to the group of people I've had a chance to chat with. You're career and what you've done in the world of boxing is one of my favorite things to ponder. And one of the things that makes me so happy about it is that I very much remember you in your first, on one of your first boxing on camera things, which is when you worked with me at the Boxing Channel.
Yes, and I was just looking up some fights that we covered, and that was 9 years ago now. And
wow, that's amazing.
I looked up, one of the ones that came to mind was Brandon Rios versus Urbano Antion, and that was back in 2011. And I was like,
wow.
Oh my Lord, time has flown by now. And just from covering events, doing stand-ups and interviews to now being the only female play-by-play, I mean, we've come quite a ways in the last 9 years, but it's been an incredible journey. And you've been with me and a mentor of mine and supported my career the whole time. So part of me, it wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for your support and your guidance and me watching you do your thing. So I thank you for that, and I'm happy to be on your show.
Well, I am delighted. And yes, your journey, of course, your broadcasting journey includes other successes as well. But in recent years, you've been so associated with the sport of boxing, and it's been really remarkable. And I remember back when we were doing the Boxing Channel shows, and right then at the beginning, with you getting even into a sport that you were new to, what I sensed about you and what I felt about you was your preparation and your professionalism. And I think that those are two things that transcend, being in a situation where you're not the one that knows everything, right? Those two things can carry you a long way.
Well, that's true. I mean, I had the foundation being a graduate of School of Broadcasting, my degree from college in broadcast journalism. So I kind of had that background. I had the internship background, but coming from covering high school football and then covering college basketball and then dipping my toe in boxing, it was like, okay, I know how to interview and I know how to study and prepare, but the subject matter was completely different. But that part can be learned and studied, and the more you immerse yourself in it, the more you learn about it. And but having that foundation of being able to know how to prepare, to study your questions, and to really be open to learning a new subject, if you will, that's kind of where it all started. I think that's what you could see from the beginning. So
yeah, it's a very good point. And I always say broadcast, I mean, some of the people I've worked with, I always talk about Bob Lee, the great, who of course was a great host on ESPN, who did boxing with me long time ago, in the 80s. And he was not a boxing guy. He didn't know the sport very well, but he was a very skilled broadcaster. And I say to this day, he's one of the top 6 or 7 people that I've worked with doing play-by-play in boxing because of what you're talking about. He was able to assimilate the subject matter and use his broadcasting skills to get the job done. Now, you of course, did a lot of work at the NFL Network, and that was one of the places where I think you honed your skills as a broadcaster. Was that, in fact, a great place for you to kind of, I mean, it was a wonderful exposure for you, and it was great for your career, for sure.
It was, Al, and that was the first time I had the audience, like a nationwide audience, and I had to really carry myself in more of a hosting type role, because I was doing a lot of reporting before that. And as you know, you've been in every sort of role. Every role is a little bit different in how you carry yourself. One role you have to go in and out of breaks and read promos. Another role you're just asking questions and tossing back. I mean, so I was able to sit at the news desk and do news updates with them, and that was at the top of the hour every hour. So that's also copywriting, because you're writing headlines. That's reading out of a teleprompter. I learned a lot from that experience. And then the stuff I did in the digital world with them, with NFL Fan Pass, going behind the scenes and actually interviewing professional athletes. That was my first experience with that. And they carry themselves a little bit different than the college and the high school athletes that I had interviewed in
Just
the past.
a smidge, huh?
Yeah, the egos are a little bit different. Although in the last 10 years, some of these college guys have the same ego as the To your point,
Yeah, that's 100% true. The funny thing you're saying that, when I was at Sports Center, I did a lot of baseball coverage, and I always say that God bless them, baseball players, not the easiest to cover. I of all the sports, I have to say some of them were a little more difficult. So you get, depending on the situation and where you're at, sometimes it's a little harder to cover athletes. Boxers, on the other hand, I have found to be very willing subjects, and I'm curious to get your take on that because you have covered many, many sports. It strikes me that boxers are among the most cooperative.
100% agree with you. And I think that's why I stayed in the sport for so long, because I'm not too jaded or too, pushed aback by the demeanor of this type of professional athlete. And also, the dynamic is completely different when it's an individual sport versus a team sport. And I had only covered team sports before. Granted, yes, boxers have a team, but when it comes to performing, it's mano a mano, or
good point.
Woman. So that dynamic and that pressure and everything on just one athlete, it made it a little bit more challenging to learn how to prepare, because you're trying to attack different storylines on the athlete you just talked to 6 months ago, and not much has changed. Versus a football or basketball or baseball team, you can talk to a different guy and get different things all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the egos, just like you said, it's aside from a few. Social media has started to change some things in more recent years, but they've been the most humble, the most, family oriented. I've really enjoyed them, and a lot of them, could walk around and people wouldn't know who they were, and they still are making $1 million something. That's not really the case in other sports. So I think that's what helps keep most of them humble.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very intriguing. So your boxing journey took you to Top Rank Boxing, where you did worked on their digital platform, and you worked on the international broadcast and pay-per-view shows and a number of different things. And then you have, in fact, become now the second woman. Claudia Trejos, our good friend, was the first one to do it, and we love her. I know you love her, and I love her too.
I give her, every time someone says the first, I'm like, no. Yeah. The second ever, yes.
Yeah, isn't that funny? I once said you were the first, and then I realized, no, you weren't, because Claudia had done it. And she, of course, like you, totally a jack of all trades. She has done every role that you can do in broadcasting, but you became the official play-by-play person for the ESPN Plus shows, and also for the international shows that Top Rank has done. And back a million years ago, when I was being an analyst on ESPN, and then started to do play-by-play, what I did was, I remember looking at role models of mine, people from the past and from the present, and looking at each of what they've done and trying to gather little pieces of it, not to copy them. What was your approach to how you decided you wanted to approach doing play-by-play?
Well, the funny thing is, I never dreamt or wanted or even asked to do play-by-play. I never saw myself in that role. Top Rank and ESPN approached me about it because we were kind of in this 3-man booth where I was kind of in the middle of doing some play-by-play and also doing some color. And they really wanted to go down to a 2-man for the plus and the undercard international. And they're like, look, you're kind of doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Why don't we groom you to take that lead role, and then we can sit you next to either a trainer, as in like a Brian McIntyre, Bo Mack, or a fighter like Chris Algieri, etc., to do the analyst, and you do the play-by-play / color. And I'm like, oh my God, I was going to say no at first, because I really didn't feel like, I didn't know if I was ready for it. And Claudia having done it so long ago, like I didn't have any other even woman to look at and say, okay, I'll just talk to her, or I'll get her a lead or whatever. So I looked at, there wasn't. So I talked to Jim Lampley, who, Top Rank and HBO had done shows side by side for so long, things like that. I grew up listening to Vin Scully and Chick Hearn living in LA, like the greatest play-by-play voices, you know, and some
And
of
Chick did some boxing, by the way. He did it very well.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I
he did.
not know
He
that.
did some boxing.
So, you know, I did some of that, and then I just would keep watching
Yeah.
more and more. I had been around the sport for so long, and I think the hardest thing, even now, just doing it a year under my belt, is I think, and I haven't done it in other sports, maybe you can correct me, but it happens so fast. It's got to be the hardest, if not one of the hardest sports to do play-by-play or blow-by-blow, because it's not like in football where you're like the 50, the 40, the 30, you see what's coming ahead.
Right.
Boxing, you can't. And if you miss a picture, you're looking down at your notes and a knockout happens and you miss it, you got to wait for the replay. It's learning as you go.
And if you are over talking and you're telling a 45-second or 1 minute story instead of the 20-second story that you should be telling, you will miss that action and you will be behind. So you're right. And there's no rules in play-by-play, although one of my pet peeves is I think we're losing rules in play-by-play for all sports. But it used to be that, you know, you let's say in football, you would do play-by-play and you'd be quiet before when the snap of the ball was happening. You'd talk after the play was done. And there were certain rules. Same is true. I did a lot of college basketball play-by-play at ESPN, and there were certain things dictated by the action. Not so in boxing.
Well, I feel like there's certain things that I was schooled on, like when action heats up, call a few punches, but let the ambient sound play. Or when there's a knockout, I lay out, or a knockdown, I lay out, and I let the referee hear the count, hear what's happening. Like, I don't like to talk over it. You can do that when the replay happens, you know.
Absolutely.
So there's certain things about letting it breathe and letting it flow that sometimes can get lost with, especially it's hard in a 3-man. You know, you work in a 3-man booth, and it's challenging to manage the ebbs and flows of a broadcast team, especially in a sport where things can change in a second.
Right. Absolutely. And what you just said, which is part of the reason why I very much enjoy hearing you do it, and I think you are so on track with the style that you bring to it, I think that's absolutely the truth. And even if listeners get used to the idea of people doing something else, at the end of the day, what you just described is really what will suit them better. My wife, who's I've done a lot of music, as you know, and my wife, who's a professional singer for over 35 years, would always tell me, you know, you could see somebody performing and they might be just a little bit out of tune, but not everybody knows it. They don't know what they're seeing that's making them feel uncomfortable, but they are uncomfortable. And my theory is that a broadcast in which there's no dead sound and people are talking every second and the action is being subliminated by the announcers, people don't know why that's uncomfortable, but they know they're uncomfortable.
Good, really good point. And I think that nowadays, in the era of social media and people being able to voice their opinions at the the drop of a hat, you can get a sense of what people like and what they don't like. And you take it with a grain of salt, because if your bosses or your producers or your coworkers and people say you're doing a good job or they like it, but you can kind of hear when the fans and people think someone's talking too much or over boisterous or whatnot. So you kind of find your way. And look, I've been doing this role for only a little over a year. I have so much to learn and so much to go, but sitting alongside guys like you, like Rich Murata, like the Colonel Bob Sheridan, like, you three have been like my godfathers in this sport and have, and all have something unique and bring something different. The Colonel could do a whole broadcast by himself, a 4-hour broadcast, by himself and talk the whole time and be totally fine. You and then Rich, like, everyone has their different style, and I'm trying to grab a little bit of all of that and find my place and where my lane's going to be. And I think the fans know I'm still doing that, but they've given me a lot of respect and a lot of kudos because, it's 10 years now and they kind of understand, okay,
That's
least
right.
she knows the sport. She knows what she's doing. She's found her voice, and now she just needs to find her voice in this role. And
Yeah, that's well put, and that's exactly it. You've already earned their respect from the work you've done, and now they're just seeing you in a different light. One of the this era of boxing is one that has produced, I think, some very exciting moments and some very exciting fighters, many of which you've had the privilege to cover. And now coming out of the, as we are coming out of the pandemic and getting boxing going again, which Top Rank did as pioneering to try and get fights on, and they had to go through the slings and arrows of all the things that could or might go wrong, and that they had to work past. So kudos to them for doing it. Yeah. But one of the things that emerged from this summer series that you just did on Top Rank was a kind of a folk hero emerged. A guy who is a former MMA fighter and who is at 27 years of age improving as a boxer. And he put on some really great performances and won the hearts of fans. And that's Clay Collard.
Yeah, we did not see that coming at all.
No.
There was a few guys that we thought, just from, as you know, having Zoom fighter meetings now, where you get some of their
Right.
personality or their story, and you're like, it's hard to root against this guy, or, I hope he does well, or I hope he has a good performance. And when you're going against a guy like David Kaminsky, who's a hot prospect, and you're just thinking, he's in there as the B-side, he's in there as the opponent, but I hope he has a good showing. And then he wins, and you're looking at his resume, and he's beaten undefeated guy after undefeated guy, and you look at his style, and it's this unorthodox, squared up, come forward, throw a lot of punches, not throw angles, and you're like, what's going on with this guy? But it's working, and it's entertaining as heck. And he's entertaining, and his story. And I think that's been the great part about, being able to showcase some of these guys that would not have been on television pre-pandemic, pre-COVID,
Right.
and giving them an opportunity, because every now and again you get these diamonds in the rough. And I'm not saying that, who knows if he'll work his way to world championship level, but there are levels to this game, and there are
Absolutely.
guys that belong to fill in all those spots.
Yes.
And he's a guy that has really taken advantage of the opportunity, has dedicated his life now to boxing and to the sport. And I'm really excited to see what he's going to do next. Top Rank does a great job of matchmaking, and they know what they're doing with guys like this. And as he continues to progress and moves on more of the quote unquote A side, although he will say, I don't look at myself ever as an A side. I like to be the underdog. I've fought my way to get to where I am my whole life with that mentality. But he's been a special one, and I'm glad that everybody has gravitated towards his story, being homeless, living in the car.
That's amazing.
If you haven't heard about, I'm sure if you're in boxing world, you've heard about Clay Collard, but look him up, and it's hard to root against guys like that.
Yeah, you make a good point. Every level of his story is fascinating. And you made the good point, which I subscribe to 100%. There are all kinds of levels of success. And doing the old Top Rank series on ESPN years and years ago, where, again, it was a developmental series, there would be fighters that would get better every time out. And maybe they weren't going to win a world title, but they were going to win an NABF title, and they were going to be in exciting fights, and they were going to have what you would term as a successful boxing career. So there's all kinds of levels of success, and Clay Collard is a perfect example. He is getting better at his craft, and whether he ever becomes a superstar and is able to be a champion, that's another question. But the fact that he's improving every time out and giving fans a lot of excitement is undeniable.
And we've seen guys, one of my broadcast partners in Chris Algieri, who was a world
Perfect
champion
example.
boxer and made the transition to become a world champion boxer.
Yes.
It's not the traditional route, although he did have quite an extensive amateur boxing career, because he started as a boxer and then transitioned to being a mixed martial artist and fighting UFC, which didn't work out, and then came back to boxing. He has that foundation, but who's to say that he might not get matched correctly and get a shot at a world title. Who knows? But either way, like you said, he's good for the sport. He's entertaining, and he's given us another person that we can, talk about, particularly during the summer series, that will be an entertaining fight each and every time because of his unorthodox style and approach.
Absolutely. So boxing, getting back into the flow now. We're involved in our a long series now of Showtime fights. Top Rank is coming back with the PBC. Top Rank is coming back with more fights and bigger fights in their next go around. And all fans are now starting to look forward to big fights. And one of the fights that everybody is interested in, and you've covered both these men and announced their fights. Vasily Lomachenko, clearly one of the top, if not the top pound-for-pound fighter in the world today, and Teofimo Lopez, who is a lightweight champion who is coming off what I thought was a remarkable victory against Richard Comey. Richard Comey is a very, very good fighter, and Teofimo Lopez knocked him out very early in that fight, and that was a remarkable performance. So you have the young lion and Lomachenko, who is, more experienced, at least in terms of all his amateur experience, and even though he hasn't had that many pro fights, but he's clearly a multiple champion. That's a fight that I have to think, as you go around the country and talk to boxing fans, and you talk to people in boxing, is resonating so much with people.
Yeah, and it's been resonating since before COVID-19 hit, and people
Right.
are just like, are we getting it in May? And then it was like September, and now it's October. And, it's just one of those things where it's got to happen soon. Teofimo has made it clear that that's his last fight at 135. If you follow him on social media, he's just growing. His body's growing. He's getting bigger. Vasily Lomachenko has been now out of the ring for quite some time, and 135 isn't really his natural weight class. He's more of a 130 pounder. Probably could make 126 if he had to, although I doubt it. But this is a fight that needs to happen right now, not only for the sport of boxing, for both of these guys, because of where they are at this point in both of their careers. And it's a unification fight. And in a sport where you have so many champions and, so many champions, even with one, sanctioning body, it's crazy. So these unification fights are very, very important for our sport. And the fact that Vasily Lomachenko is willing to take on the young gun in Teofimo. Teofimo's willing at this point, after winning a world title and in his next fight, he's going to take on the pound for pound bet at his age. I mean, that says he's got some chutzpah too with him. So huge fight. And it's interesting. I've seen, on social media, it goes 50-50. I feel like a lot of the young guns are Teofimo, and they want the new era. And I feel like some people are like, too early for you, young buck. It's still Lomachenko's time, and you haven't seen anybody like him in the pros. So it's very intriguing, and I really hope that it gets made sooner than later. The whole fans, no fans thing is really what the holdup is going to be.
Yeah, it's difficult to make big fights like that. No, you're right. It's difficult to make those fights because of the commerce involved and the lack of fans. And is it pay-per-view? Isn't it? How do you do it? There's so many questions. That one is tentatively set for October, and it is, in fact, a fight that resonates. That lightweight division. You mentioned Lopez may not stay there long, and Lomachenko maybe is truly below it. But there's so many other good 135 pounders that your mouth waters about the idea of even more matchups beyond that with Ryan Garcia and Gervonta Davis and Devin Haney, all great fighters.
Would love to see. I mean, they could do a 135 tournament. Sign me up for that.
Wow.
Throw all the promoters out the window and just let these guys go at it. There is so much talent in that division.
No, there is.
All, in my opinion, got that star quality, not just
every one of them do
carry themselves, and how they are on social media, and you know, whether they get attention, good or bad, they still have the eye of the public. And that's what you're starting to see with these guys now becoming stars. And I think that's such a hot division. I really look forward to seeing what happens in the future of 135.
All right, so every promoter watching this show, you got to listen to Christina because she's giving you the right advice. So and I feel everyone in boxing should listen to you about that and everything else.
Thank you. As long as I have you to co-sign for me, then I know I'm headed in the right direction.
I'm with you 100%. I'm with you 100% on that and most things for sure. You are, so one of the questions to you is, you are, of course, doing a lot of boxing. If down the road you had a chance to work in other sports and you could fit it into your schedule, would you still want to do that?
Yes, I would. I feel like boxing will always have my heart, and something that I would always love to keep a foot in no matter what happens, especially being a year-round sport. And, we were doing fights maybe 2 times a month. It still does leave some room for other things, but basketball was my first love. I would love to get back to doing some sort of, NBA coverage or something like that. I love football as well. I've done football. But yes, if something else did come my way, I would be open to trying to work something in because I love to stay busy. And I would love that. But boxing is something that I feel like, I don't know, it stole my heart. Like it's taken it and it's got a hold of it. And I feel like even if I tried to do something for a little while, even when I was NFL Network was taking up a lot of my time and busy, like I still was like, I need to get back and work this fight. I need to stay involved. And you've done other things and been able to still all these years, boxing just keeps bringing you back, whether it was from ESPN and Showtime
sure.
and now doing your own podcast where you talk it even when you're not working it. It's just one of those things where I feel like I have to stay involved, even if other
No,
things.
it's true. And you doing this play-by-play role is important. Back years ago, I pushed to do play-by-play in boxing, hoping it would be a road to doing play-by-play in other sports, which I did get to do on some occasions, not quite as many as I wanted, but still at ESPN and some other outlets. And for you, I think the idea of doing play-by-play could be an attractive idea for other sports, for people to come to you as well, which it brings us around to the question that I'm almost sometimes loath to ask of my colleagues, my female colleagues, because I almost don't like to call too much attention to it because it shouldn't even be a story. But women, even to this day, it's a bit of an uphill struggle in sportscasting, though certainly a million times better than it was, 20 or 25 years ago. Do you feel a responsibility in any way to make sure that you pave the way? And I know I've heard you on interviews with other women sportscasters kind of talking about this, so I sense the answer to this is yes. But do you feel like there should be a feeling of helping out to each other?
It's 100% why I accepted the position. It wasn't because of me and in my career. It's the fact that I have an opportunity for girls, young women, college students, whatever, coming up behind me, or because of age, that they can see that presence in that role, something that I didn't really see in that role.
Right.
And I'm also a mother now, so for me to be able to tell this to my son one day, what I was able to do, and my grandkids one day, what I was able to do, for that, I had to accept, because I knew I wouldn't allow myself to fail. But if I put, my worries and my concerns and my fear of failure to the side and know that I have an opportunity to push forward what Claudia started many years ago and represent what I can do now, then I can't fail, because there's too much riding on this. So that was 100% the opportunity. And I knew that I was seeing, Doris Burke in NBA, and I'm hearing Becky Owens in the NFL, and I'm seeing Jessica Mendoza in the MLB. And I'm like, okay, there's a few of us out there, but not in the sport that I love so much. Nobody right now in boxing. So I have to take this and I have to run with it. And the fact that they came to me with it, to take a little bit of the pressure off, because it wasn't like I was begging for the opportunity, right? I said, let me just go in there and give it the best shot that I can. And then the other woman, either working in boxing, whether or not they have aspirations of being play-by-play. I don't know if Cynthia Conti or, Jessica Gonzalez or Michelle Joy Felt or any of these women, Adriana Jimenez, like, I don't know if they have the desire to be in my role. Right. But at least we can check that box that one of us is there.
Yeah, and, very good point.
Done it, and hopefully that will open the door for more even women in boxing or that aspire to be, or young girls watching fights with their dads.
It's very intriguing and says a lot about you that part of your decision-making process in deciding whether you're going to accept a challenge had to do not just with yourself, but how would it affect others. And I think that is knowing you as I do, and knowing about your character and your overall approach to life, I'm not surprised that that's played a role in your decision making. But I think it's fascinating that it did, and speaks extremely well of you. Well, I can say that I know that boxing fans have great respect for you and that they enjoy the work you do, as we all in the industry do. And I know that you're gonna have a continued great future in it as you move forward.
Al, thank you so much. Like I said, you've been, supporting me back from Boxing Channel, almost 10 years ago, and working alongside you with these top-ranked early shows and with Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame, and just, seeing how respect and everything you are, to know that I have your respect in return means a lot to me, as I can't put a price on what that means. And I made you proud.
Oh, you do. You definitely do that. And, you and I have not had a chance to work on calling fights, which maybe someday we will. But we have had a chance, as you alluded to host the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame for our good friend Rich Murata, who the founder of, who you alluded to as a terrific broadcaster, which he is. But he also will have in his legacy and resume that he created the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame, and you and I twice now have hosted that. And the last time we hosted it, that event is renowned for going about 15 hours each time.
10, and you went 15.
And it's always like a pajama party. By the time we're done, we're getting ready to order a pizza and make prank phone calls, Right. And you and I, the last time, we thought we had this nailed, and we were sitting there thinking to ourselves and maybe just whispering, okay, this is really going, we're going to get done quickly. And of course we didn't, because something always sends it off the rails, but we did our part to try and make it quicker.
Those shows are awesome. Even having Rosie Perez worked on those shows with us, and you never know what someone's going to say in their speech or how long we're going to take. It's not like the Oscars or that.
Yeah, that's right.
Starts playing, and it's like, all right, let's go off the stage. But
no,
are so fun. I love to support the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame and Rich Murata.
It's really fun.
So Ross Lewis and what they're doing, and I'm bummed this year because of everything that has happened, that they are not able to have the induction ceremony, especially for all the inductees.
Yeah.
They make it up next year. And even if I'm not hosting it anymore going forward, because my schedule is jam-packed, I always try to donate or try to attend as a guest if I can, because it's such a great organization there, and nonprofit, and boxing, it's a piece of boxing history. And
yeah, it's a great organization, and we had, you and I had a lot of fun doing it, and it is a fun event, wacky but lots of fun.
Yes.
Christina, thank you so much.
You guys have a great schedule. I was looking at the fights.
Yeah, we do have a really nice schedule,
and I am so excited for our sport of boxing to see fights like this come back. It's not a ESPN or Showtime where people.
Absolutely.
It's like for the greater good of our sport to put the best fights on TV or on digital as possible.
Yes.
When I saw your guys' schedule, I'm like, go get it. Like, there's some good looking fights there, and I'm happy for you guys to be able to get back to doing what we love so much.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. This has been the longest period in my life that I haven't been on an airplane or called a boxing match. So
Right.
that's kind of strange. But I think that, there a lot of fights are going to start being announced now, fights on Fox, Top Rank fights on ESPN. I know DAZN has a number of them in the pipeline. So I think what's going to happen is that our announcement of all these fights, because it's long-term going all the way to December, the fights on Showtime, was kind of the kicking off, I think, of a whole bunch of announcements that people are going to make where fans are going to see important fights in the future. I saw that Errol Spence and Danny Garcia looks like it's going to happen. You and I talked about Lomachenko and Lopez likely in October. Fury Wilder is probably going to be later in the year, and then a whole bunch of others are gonna fill in. I know the Victor Postol and Ramirez fight still looks like it's probably on the schedule, right?
The charm for those guys.
Yeah, I know. A couple of fights like that one and several others have been canceled or postponed several times.
Yeah. So.
Crystina, I appreciate so much you visiting with us. And if you're unlucky, I'll still have your phone number, and I'll be bugging you again to be on here.
I would love to. It's always a great conversation. It's just like chatting with one of my friends, and you have my contact information whenever you need me. Please let me know. And I just, like I said, I respect you tremendously and everything you've done, Al, and your book. I mean, everything. It's just so awesome to have guys like you in my corner. And
I'm thrilled about all the success you've had.
I love you big time.
You're the best. Thanks, Crystina. Take care.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
That was tremendous. Sorry I kept you so long, but it was so interesting I didn't want to stop it.
How long has it been? Oh, who cares? It's hard when you're just talking. You don't know.
I know. You know what? And this format is such that you're not encumbered by time. So sometimes you're getting into a really good conversation. Hey, that was wonderful, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Great questions, great conversation. And
all right. When are you coming back with fights? Do you know?
Yeah, the 22nd of August. I think we're scheduled to go back.
Oh, okay. So you guys are coming back pretty quick too.
Yeah, once a week though. I think they were going between Friday and Saturday, but I think it's going to be just Saturday nights going forward once a week. So
yeah, once a week. You guys had the schedule of fights was crazy. What you guys had?
Fights a week for 7 weeks.
That's nuts. I'm like,
I need a break. Dates and names were getting mixed up.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember who knocked who out in what round. It was just study and purge because that's the only way you can keep up with what's going on. So.
Yeah, I never remember, even in the early days of doing the Top Rank series every week for 45 or 46 weeks a year, and even if I'd throw in there'd be a pay-per-view thrown in or something, I never remember doing 2 fights a week for that long a period. That's a lot of boxing. So
it is a lot. And people are like, oh, do you remember he fought? I was like, I do not remember last week. That was 4 shows ago by now. It's like, it's crazy. So,
that's true.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, listen, you take care, and I'll talk to you soon. And thanks again for doing this.
You got it. Thank you to your crew.
Bye-bye. Take care. So that was our visit with Crystina Poncher, and Chip, I'm so thrilled that in the early days I had a little something to do with her kind of moving into the boxing part of her broadcasting career.
Well, and you can see that she has whatever it is to be a great broadcaster, but looking at the difference in what was an all-male bastion back in the 80s, really when you started, first year or two at ESPN, it has changed demonstrably. And women's voices have brought something to the sport which makes broadcasting rise up just by their inclusion, I think.
Yeah, I said it in the interview when I was talking to her about her being kind of a groundbreaker in the boxing world, and I said I'm loath to even bring this up because I hate the idea that you have to bring up this situation, and it's certainly now women have a much broader role in sports broadcasting. it shouldn't even be something we have to bring up, but it is interesting watching the growth of women in sports broadcasting. When I started out in the early 1980s, there were very few. ESPN had some women working with them. I remember Gail Gardner, who did the Sports Center, came out to cover a number of fights where she would be the anchor on the coverage, working with me, and I think Jim Gray was just beginning at that time, and we'd often have another boxing person with us, and she and I had many conversations over coffee where we just were chatting about the idea that she was a groundbreaker, and she had to kind of make sure that she got the job done, and I think women, much like other minorities in certain situations, felt like they had to be better, not just good enough, but better, so that they didn't suffer the slings and arrows of people being critical. And now, obviously, for the most part, people understand that women are going to be in sports broadcasting. They're part of the landscape, and many are doing a terrific job. And it's a part of the scene in sports broadcasting. And one of my, I've had many good friends in broadcasting, women who have done a terrific job, and I always enjoy hearing them give me their perspective in terms of what it has taken for them in several instances to gain acceptance and move ahead with their profession. But thank goodness we're in a more enlightened era now.
Well, speaking of enlightened, we have some great people who send us wonderful questions. And let's get going. So, quick one. I've got how good would Edwin Valero have been?
Yeah, that's interesting. Edwin Valero, of course, who died after in tragic circumstances. He committed murder, and then presumably, he died in jail. And it was a very, very tragic situation with him. And in the ring, I did his last fight, and it was when he was just starting to gain more worldwide acceptance, and you could see the potential that this young man had. He was a terrific fighter who I think would have been in the junior welterweight and welterweight division and lightweight division. He probably could fight in a bunch of those weight classes. He was going to be a superstar. I believe that he was, had the ability at least to do that. Now, whether he could have ever controlled his life and his instincts and his darker side enough to do that remains to be seen. But I think Edwin Valero would have been a superstar.
And if you look at it, a lot of boxers that we know to this day have had time behind bars, and boxing is an amazing sport for rehabilitating people.
It is. I mean, it's a sport that has given many people direction. We had a couple of fighters on our card this past week. Tremaine Williams is a perfect example, who fought in the main event. He, for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, he's really straightened his life out, and he had a shot at a world title.
Yep. Next question from Matt Nichols. All time, who wins? And he's got 2 great fights. So let's do the first one. Armstrong versus Duran at 135.
Oh, boy. Henry Armstrong, Hammer and Hank, the man who won a title in 3 weight classes, and not with junior divisions. He won 3 weight classes that were separated by a lot. The featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight. And Henry Armstrong is on almost everyone's top 5 list. Roberto Duran, of course, iconic and a fantastic fighter. And at 135 is the weight class where he was probably at his absolute best. This is a very tricky fight to figure out, because Armstrong was very aggressive, and they would have gotten together, and many punches would have been thrown and landed. I'm going to give a very slight nod to Roberto Duran in this fight, partially because I've seen film of Henry Armstrong, but I can't say I've seen enough to understand exactly how good he was, but I know he was great. But part of it is even what I've seen. I think that Duran was so relaxed in the way he handled pressure and dealt with it that I think he might have just barely edged out Henry Armstrong in a close decision, but it's clearly a fight that could have gone either way.
Okay, and next fight, Hearns Mayweather at 147.
Yeah, this one I have less doubt about. I think Tommy Hearns is a nightmare matchup for Floyd Mayweather. Tall, rangy, powerful, could box. And the only issues he ever had was when somebody was a big puncher and could hurt him. And I would go to the fight between Tommy Hearns and Wilfred Benitez, who is a latter-day Floyd Mayweather, very similar to Floyd in terms of his overall skill set and boxing ability. And Hearns beat Wilfred Benitez. It went to a decision, as I think the Hearns-Mayweather fight likely would. But I think Tommy Hearns would use his height and his reach to bedevil Mayweather, and I don't think Floyd would be able to hurt him. So I think it would be a win for Tommy Hearns.
A glorious time in the 80s when we had so many amazing fighters at that range. Can you imagine if Mayweather was born 20 years, 30 years earlier, and you had his personality?
Well, it would have been interesting. I mean, number one, it would be fascinating to see him compete against that group of welterweights. And of course he was also excellent at lower weights, Floyd Mayweather. So even in those weights, we might have seen him in against some great people. So, Floyd's faced a lot of excellent fighters, terrific fighters. But during that era, we would have loved to have seen him in against some of these great fighters.
Great. Okay, next question from Gary Young. What are your 3 current dream fights?
The 3 fights that probably I would think of now that there are a bunch of fights I'd like to see, but I just kind of picked out 3 that I think would be interesting. One of them is likely to happen, Josh Taylor and Jose Ramirez at the 140-pound weight class. That one they're kind of building toward, and I have a feeling that one is going to happen, and that's one I would really like to see. I'd love to see Canelo and David Benavidez. We're going to have David Benavidez coming up on our next fight in a week and a half or so on Showtime. And that fight at 168, I think, is a really good fight because Benavidez is an offensive machine who has defensive liabilities. Canelo has a phenomenal chin, so I expect Benavidez would land a lot of punches, but would he hurt Canelo? And Canelo would certainly land some big shots against Benavidez. And how much would Benavidez' defensive liabilities mean in terms of whether he could win the fight? So I love that fight. I think it's really an interesting one. And for number 3, what was my number 3 fight? Let's see. Of course. Because everybody wants it, Errol Spence and Crawford, and Terrence Crawford. Everybody wants to see it, so I want to see it. It's like one of those fights that, boxing has fights like that it's like an itch that you can't scratch. And when a fight doesn't happen like that, it was like Mayweather-Pacquiao for all those years. It begins to be a boil for boxing, like a thing that the casual boxing fan and the casual person that covers the sport once in a while, they go to it like a magnet. Well, they're not making that Spence Crawford fight, so the sport clearly doesn't make any fights. So I would like to see that one made for a lot of different reasons. One, it would be an great fight, and number 2, it would get the monkey off boxing's back. Yeah,
and Mayweather-Pacquiao, if it had been made 5 years earlier, would have been one of the great fights, potentially at least, one of the greatest fights ever.
Absolutely. Yeah, it still did great commerce, but as a fight, it would have been, I think, really exciting.
Okay, this is from Robin Ray. A question you've probably been asked a few times. How about a 1966 Muhammad Ali from the Cleveland William fight versus a 1988 Mike Tyson from the 91 second special, the Michael Spinks fight. Who wins, in your humble opinion?
Yeah, he picked a period where both those fighters were dazzling. I mean, the Ali that fought Cleveland Williams, and Cleveland Williams was a big punching, hard-hitting heavyweight. He had lost to Sonny Liston from a semi-previous era, I guess, but he was a big puncher. And Ali just destroyed him. And, of course, we know what Tyson did against Michael Spinks. Those fighters at that time, it was an Ali that still had great movement, was way before the rope-a-dope times. He had hand speed to beat the band, and was a very active fighter in terms of volume of punching. Tyson, powerful, relentless, quick, and put pressure on you every second of every round. The difference in this fight at the end of the day, in my opinion, would be Ali's chin. Ali had maybe the best chin in the history of boxing. He went down against Joe Frazier, but jumped up immediately. He took vicious pummeling from Joe Frazier in a number of fighters, from Kenny Norton, from Ernie Shavers, who was a monstrous puncher. Other fighters, Ron Lyle, who was a really good puncher. Hurting Ali and keeping him down was a virtual impossibility. So if this fight was destined to go the distance, which it may have been, I have to believe Ali would have been able to box effectively and win a decision against Tyson. It certainly would have been an interesting challenge at that time to Ali, that's for sure. But I think he would have frustrated Mike Tyson and ultimately won a decision.
And I know you went out and bet the farm on the Buster Douglas fight in Tokyo with Mike Tyson. You knew that upset was coming, didn't you? You were the one guy.
I had a sixth sense that that he was doing it, and did go out and bet. Is my nose growing when I tell you this? Because I'm clearly lying. Yeah, it was. In fact, I didn't even go cover that fight. We were covering all the major fights for SportsCenter and ESPN, and they didn't even send me. They sent Eric Clemens to just kind of peripherally cover. We didn't do our normal coverage on it because nobody expected Buster Douglas to win that fight.
Yeah, one of my memories is that was the night of the All-Star Game skills competition. And we're flipping back and forth, and no one thought Buster Douglas had a chance. But fighters all become human. Here's
a funny story. I watched that fight in the same room as Donald Trump.
You are kidding me.
I was. I was at a benefit that was being done. It was an Italian-American group that invited me to come, because why would you not want a guy named Bernstein at your event?
It's a natural.
I guess they knew I was married to a Rocco, right? And we were there with a bunch of celebrities, a lot of Italian-American celebrities, and Johnny Russo, who had a role in The Godfather, who was also a performer, did a benefit did a performance, and we all spoke and we signed autographs and did a bunch of things. And then we went up to this room where Trump was there with a lot of his executives, and of course all the celebrities were there, and they had a lovely spread there for us, and we watched the Douglas Tyson fight. And of course you remember that Trump's hotel was set to host the Holyfield Tyson fight after that. It was going to be a huge event. Very huge. Yeah, it was going to be monstrous. And the fight starts, and it's not going so well for Mike Tyson. And I see Trump and his minions, they were about 10 feet away from me. They're getting more and more agitated over this. And then one of the guys comes over, and he said to me, he said, "Tyson can't lose this fight, can he?" I said, "Well, the way it's going, I think it is possible." I said, "I know you want me to reassure you and your boss that he can't, but nonetheless, I think he possibly can." And of course, it turned out that he did. They were none too happy by the time they left that evening. They had seen millions of dollars go down the drain.
Yeah, and it changed everything. one fight, but that's the beauty of the sport, and that's why we all love covering it so much. And we've got another question from Nando. Is the Twin Charlo day-night doubleheader pay-per-view potentially the deepest PPV fight card since Revenge of the Rematches?
Yeah, that was a very esoteric and interesting question, and it had me going back in time to remind myself of that pay-per-view that he talked about, Revenge of the Rematches. It was put on by Don King, and here I'm going to read to you the people that were on that pay-per-view back then. It was Julio Cesar Chavez in a rematch against Frankie Randall, Azuma Nelson in a rematch against Jesse James Leija, Gerald McClellan in a rematch against Julian Jackson, and Terry Norris in a rematch against Simon Brown. So it's pretty hard to get a pay-per-view with that many champions on it. Several Hall of Famers included in that group. That was an amazing collection of talent. And to simply even be mentioned in the same breath as that pay-per-view in terms of depth is pretty extraordinary. But this pay-per-view card on September 26th is a strong one. And I'm going to remind people what the fights are on this card coming up on September 26th. It features, as you mentioned, both Jermell and Jermall Charlo. First of all, Jermell Charlo against Jason Rosario in a title unification matchup. Rosario just beat Julian Williams. That's a terrific fight. Jermall Charlo taking on Sergey Derevchenko, who just had a fight in which many people believe he beat Triple G, Gennady Golovkin. That's a spectacular matchup. A young phenom, Brandon Figueroa, taking on Damon Vasquez. Also, Mario Barrios, a very talented champion, taking on Ryan Carl, who's a good fighter. And these last two fights, very exciting matches. Daniel Roman, a former 122-pound champ, against Emmanuel Rodriguez, also a champion. That's a fantastic fight. And finally, Diego Magdaleno, a former champ, against Isaac Cruz, who is a full-on action fighter. Magdaleno needs this win badly to stay in championship contention. That's kind of a day-night doubleheader pay-per-view. There's going to be 3 fights that'll start in the late afternoon. Then we'll have a half-hour break in between, and then there'll be 3 matches after it. It is, in terms of the depth of matchmaking and potentially good fights, I have to believe it's one of the top pay-per-view cards since that one that was referenced, the Revenge of the Rematches, which is pretty extraordinary.
Well, we have, I don't want to suck up to our viewers, but we get great questions.
We do, and that one was interesting. I hadn't thought of that Revenge of the Rematches in ages, and so that was an apt comparison.
Well, hey, a lot of fun. So the CBS corporate jet picked you up. Did they land at McCarran, or did they come right to your house and pick you up?
You know what? They actually used Chasing Star Avenue as a runway to bring the plane right to me, and I thought that was a nice gesture.
They're top talent. You got to treat them right.
Yeah, that's what I say. That's what I think. So it was a great experience, and of course we're going to be back again in a couple of weeks, and on August 15th, and we'll have or the 14th, I think, and we'll be back with David Benavides topping the bill, and we're looking forward to it as boxing continues to make its climb back. And we will have another episode of Bernstein Unplugged next week, so please be there to join us.